review again. And this time, a book that is not available in English yet. It will be published, I think, in September, at least in the UK. Little Star by the Swedish writer John Ajvide Lindqvist. The name may not ring a bell, but you've probably heard of at least one of his books before, Let the Right One In, which was a runaway success, and which was made into a really, really good movie, and which has now been made into what is probably a much less great movie, because it's just a remake, but let's hope. Anyway, that was his debut novel, and it really caused a stir, and he's just basically keeping on doing the same thing, putting real, far-out horror stories in settings that seem completely ordinary, day-to-day, boring. And that contrast is kind of his trademark, and I have to say he achieves it almost the best he's ever done in this book. When Let the Right One In was the first time I read one of his books, and when I did, it had been the opposite of praised by a very good friend of mine whose taste in books is very, very similar to mine, and she bought it because she thought it was really cool. She loves vampire stories, and a vampire story set in 1981 in Sweden and in the suburbs. She thought that just sounded really cool, and the book had been very highly priced. So she bought it, but she hated it so much that she couldn't even bring herself to finish it, which is very rare for her, but she just couldn't. So she gave it to me, and I loved it. It was like one of the best books I read that whole year. So people are different. And she's been asking me, should she try to read this? She wants to like him, because everybody else does, so she really keeps thinking there must be something to him. But she had a really hard time with all the blood and gore in Let the Right One In. And I have to say, in that respect, this is probably a safer bet, because there is very little of that kind of horror in this book. But there is some of it, and especially there is one scene which is essential to the story and to the plot that is, I have to say, it's probably even gorier than anything that you would find in Let the Right One In. So if you don't like blood and gore, if you want more of an intellectual kind of horror, then you would get the latter here, but there is some gore in it, and that is really bad. The little that is just horrendous. But, like I said, it's essential to the story, so you can't just skip over it either, because it's very important, plot-wise. The story of the book, I'm not going to get into it that much, but basically, it starts with a really, really weird premise. Then it gets... the weirdness becomes kind of everyday and normal for a while, and then it explodes again. A man who is kind of a failure, hasn't really achieved anything, his son is a bomb, he just is not quite happy with his life. He's doing something totally normal. I think he's picking mushrooms in the woods when he finds a baby that's been abandoned. Someone's tried to bury it even, but it's still alive. And when it starts screaming, to him it sounds like it's singing. The note that it produces is just perfect. It's absolutely perfect. The child is perfect pitch, and even though it's just a tiny infant, maybe just a few days old, a few weeks at most, it produces this perfect note. And he is a musician, he loves music, and he decides that he can't let this opportunity go by. So he basically takes the baby home, and his wife, they're an older couple, their son they have together, he's grown, and the wife is kind of not bullied, but cowed to some extent. So she actually goes along with this crazy idea of his. They're gonna keep the baby and raise it and teach it to sing, and it's not really clear what he wants to do, but the baby isn't normal. She grows, but she's not the way she should be. She's not mentally deficient, but just very different. And it's hard to explain. She doesn't see the world the way other people see it. And parallel to this, there is another story of another girl who is roughly the same age and who has the same name, just with a different pronunciation, who appears to be quite normal and has a normal family, and just, you know, to look at her and her family situation, you wouldn't think that anything is weird about her, which you would definitely think with the first girl, but she is still very alienated and an outsider very much in her life. And they grow up to become teenagers, and thanks to the wonders of the internet, these two meet. And when that happens, that's when all hell breaks loose, basically. Both of the girls are very lonely, and they need a human connection. Well, they both have human connection, sort of, but not with anyone that's at sort of their level. They have parents and siblings, but they don't have anyone who really understands them, and that's what they find in each other. And their connection is unique. Their friendship is almost instinctive, but it's also potentially very destructive. And the book is also a kind of a theme, I think, is enthusiasm of the young, and how that can really go awry, because when you're young, everything is so urgent. It's so desperate. Oh, I have no friends now. I might as well kill myself because I never will have any friends, which is not right. But by the time you understand that, it's kind of too late, because you need to be grown to understand things that would really help you as a teenager. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. But that's something that I see in this, that young people can be really desperate over things that aren't necessarily important, but seem extremely important, and that you need the distance of years to be able to deal with that urgency. And when you have the urgency, you don't have the distance. When you have the distance, it's no longer urgent. So that's a big part of what makes being a teenager so difficult. Yeah, that's the plot of the book. There is so much detail in it. It's beautifully written. Beautifully written. I love his language. I love his just descriptions, and his settings are so great. Again, the setting is so ordinary, like just ordinary neighborhoods and normal people who go to work and have boring jobs and eat boring dinners. It's just so normal. And then underneath the surface, there's this completely crazy thing, and it's kind of like Death on the Discworld, that he may stand there in plain sight, but people still don't see him, because that's just too absurd to believe it. And kind of like this, you know, you're sure that the parents of this one girl, the normal girl, they would never believe that their daughter could have done what she ends up doing, because you don't see it. It's right in front of you, but you don't see it, because that's just too, it defies belief. It's just too much. You can't take it in. I can't say that this is my favorite of his novels, because I would have to say that would be Harbor, the one he published before this one, but this is almost as good. For those of you who enjoyed Harbor, which is amazing, this is almost up there. The main difference is that this deals with teenagers, whereas Harbor is about a grown man, and the approach is just kind of different. Although there is a grown-up character whose voice we also get to hear in this book, it's very much the teenagers that dominate this book, and I think it's just absolutely fascinating. The settings and the crazy things that happen in them, the characters. He just creates the most fascinating characters. His language is beautiful. This is the Swedish original. I can only hope that the English translation will be half as good, because he writes so beautifully. And he says so much with relatively few words. He doesn't have to necessarily say things. You just get it. And I think that's kind of what makes a really good writer. You know, don't tell us, just show us. He really has that down so well. I can't really say anything negative about this book. If I had to, it would be that I don't buy the plot, and I don't think this could actually happen, that there could be such a person as this young girl who's the main character. But again, it's a horror novel, so You have to suspend your disbelief, and I totally did. Within the setting, within the book, I totally bought the story. So, it's wonderful. It's a very modern book. It's very contemporary. I really like though that you feel that it's happening now. Yeah, there's just nothing bad I can say about this or about any book that he's written, really, because I love all of his books. I think he's just an absolutely wonderful writer. John Ajvide Lindqvist. One of the best writers working in Sweden today, I think, because yes, he writes horror novels, but there's so much more to them, and he really is, like, again, Terry Pratchett, who is discounted to a large extent because he writes fantasy and not real literature. If you just dismiss this as horror and just think that's what it is and it has no depth, it's not profound, it doesn't expose contemporary culture, all of that, then you're so wrong, because this is, the theme is one of horror, but it's definitely right up there with some of the best that's being written in Scandinavia today. Do not miss this guy, and especially this novel, Lille, coming out this fall as Little Star. Very highly recommended, at least by me.